Hello, this is Julia. Thank you so much for joining me on my craft room adventures. Today I have a brand new card to share with you, and this time it's a wedding card. I used lots of stamps and dies by Lawn Fawn, and this is also my entry for the current Lawnfawnatics Color Challenge, which features some yellow, orange, deep purples, and dark blues. As my stamp sets, I used the car critters for the main element of my wedding scene. Then I used the Happy Village, the trees, the big and the small one. I used Village Heroes, the little chapel. Then Bicycle Built for You for the veil and the tin cans. Eggstra Amazing Easter for the tiny little bow. Happy from Mice on Ice and Wedding Day from Happy 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 for the sentiment. And I will also be using the flower crown from Swan Soiree. I stamped all of my images onto Neenah Solar White cardstock using Gina K amalgam ink, and now I'm using my Copic markers to color them in. I wanted the card to be blue, so I'm using B28 as my darkest shade, blending that out with B26, just going over the edges and pulling out the color a little bit further, just placing it where I want my darkest areas to be, then blending that out with B23. And I'm not putting all of the caps on my mat currently as I usually do, because it's over 30 degrees Celsius in my living room right now and I don't want my markers to dry out, so I hope this is okay too. As my lightest shade, I'm using B21, just blending the colors out, going over the edges so that they're nice and smooth. Then I'm going in with the second layer, again with a B28, just emphasizing the darkest areas. Then the B26, blending that out a little bit more. B23, just to pull the color a little bit further. And finally blending everything together with the B21. Just going over the edges of the B23 to make sure that it's nicely blended. I wasn't really happy with the hood just yet, so I went in with B23 again and then B21. And I did mess up a little bit and got some blue into the headlights, so I'm just using my colorless blender to fix that up a bit. Also the, what is it called, the license plate. Then I'm going in with cool grays for the metal parts of the car. I'm using C7 and C5 and C3 for the tires, and I'm using C5, C3, C1, and C0 for the bumper. I'm using the same colors, the C3, the C5, C3, C1, and C0 for the tin cans. I'm also using the C0 and the C1 for the tiny little bows because I wanted them to be white. And I'm also using C1 and C0 for the chapel, just for the main part. Just blending everything together, and in the center I'm also using the blender C0 just to pull it all together. For the veil I'm using BG70. Then for the centers of the flowers I'm using Y11 and also Y13. Then I'm using YR23 for the bell, blending that in with Y13 and Y11. I will also have all the colors listed down below, so you can check there if you're not sure. And I also started doing a color map for all my cards, or for all my future cards, that is. This card will be the first one to have it, and I will link it down below because it will be on my blog and also on my Instagram as the last picture when you slide over, so that it's easy reference to save it there. I didn't mention the greens, but those are the exact same I'm using now. I'm using YG17 as my darkest shade, then YG13 to blend that out, and then again with the darkest shade to deepen up the shadows, YG13 again, and then blending everything together with the YG11 as my lightest shade. Now I'm going back in with the YG13 just to get a nicer transition between the YG13 and the YG11. For the trunk of the trees, I'm using E75, 57, I'm sorry, E55 and E53. And I'm only showing one of the tree colorings because I colored all of them exactly the same. For my bears, I'm using E50 markers. The darkest is E55, just sparingly around the edges. Then E53 to blend that out. This is where I realized that I forgot the E53 on my second bear. Then E51, and then E50 as my highlight shade. For the steering wheel, I'm using C7, C5, C3, and C1. Here you'll see me bringing in the C7, that's why I mentioned it before, because it wasn't quite dark enough, because steering wheels are usually quite dark, mostly black here. And I'm also adding in a little bit of the B21 because I didn't know how much it would be showing behind the car. Wasn't showing at all, but you know, better safe than sorry. For the roof of the chapel, I'm also using the same colors as on the tree trunks, E57, E55, and E53. Just going in with 2 layers there as well, just to get some nice shading. And for the windows, again, I'm using BG70, just like for the veil. I'm using C7, C5, and C3 for the steps. And for the door, I'm using RV69, 66, and 63 because I wanted to bring that deep purple from the sky into my scene as well. Going over with a second layer of the BG70 for the windows. There's also a bow that I stamped there. This one is one I'm not going to be using, so I just skipped past this one. For my sky, I'm ink blending Distress Oxides, and I'm using Squeezed Lemonade, Spiced Marmalade, Dusty Concord, Seedless Preserves, and also Chipped Sapphire. I'm just blending the colors together until I'm happy with the transition, and in a minute I will be also adding in the Wilted Violet because I didn't think that the Dusty Concord was quite purple enough for the color that was shown in the color challenge. This one was too cool a tone, but mixed together those really created a nice shade, and I really like how it turned out. Just carefully blending the pink and the orange just to not muck up the colors, just going carefully back and forth. Now moving on to Dusty Concord. And I kind of regret that I did this, so if you were to do this, be sure to leave the top white before you put in the blue, because the chipped sapphire had a kind of purplish tone and not actually blue, which was kind of a shame, but it looked fine, but I would have liked it to be a bit more blue. just blending out the edges so that it's like a little bit of a curved shape up top. Going back in with the other colors just to get a nice blend with the seedless preserves again, then with the dusty concord. And now I'm also bringing in the wilted violet just to intensify the purple. Going back in with the blue, also back in with the orange because that kind of got lost when I added more of the seedless preserves, and also intensifying the yellow, and that finishes off the ink blending. I'm using the Liquid Stardust by Lawn Fawn, just adding some water and a small paintbrush and adding some splatters for some shine there. Then I'm using Twisted Citron, Mowed Lawn, and Lucky Clover for my hills. I'm ink blending the colors from the bottom up to have a lighter spot at the top. Going in with the Twisted Citron first, then intensifying that with Mowed Lawn. And then bringing in the Lucky Clover just to deepen up the color. I'm doing all of the panels, those two panels at the same time, and then I will be doing the road panel separately because I wanted to be sure that I didn't add any of the green to the road part. Now going in with a Lucky Clover, and again going back and forth with my brushes. I do use 3 different brushes for this. I just use cheap makeup brushes, and I bought enough of them so that I would have a light green, a medium green, and a dark green, and have the same for like blues and pinks and purples, so that I have a easier time switching between the colors. I'm also adding splatters of the Lucky Clover and the Mowed Lawn for some interest to the panel. Again, adding a bit of water to the ink, and I put that off to the side to dry. I just masked off a little piece of the center of my panel using Post-it tape, and I'm using Hickory Smoke Distress Oxide ink to ink blend that. And I do have a question. My Hickory Smoke ink pad is super shiny and glossy, and it looks almost wet, which I'd never had with any of my ink pads. If any of you have that, is that normal? It seemed to work fine. It just took a bit longer to dry, I believe. I don't know. It looked kind of weird, so if you had that, please let me know. Also bringing in some black soot around the edges of the road, just for some more intensity. And then I'm also adding splatters of both colors. There you can see how wet the ink is of the down in the right corner from the Hickory Smoke, so it's really weird with the ink pad. And just adding some splatters with water and the inks. Now I'm removing the Post-it tape, and I set that off to the side to dry fully before I added the same masks in the center. And now I'm blending from the outside in Twisted Citron again, Mowed Lawn, and Lucky Clover. Again, adding the splatters like I did to the other panels. Now I'm just peeling off the mask, careful not to put my fingers in the wet ink. And that finishes off the blending. For my sentiment, I just went ahead and stamped that from the Mice on Ice stamp set with Chipped Sapphire Distress Oxide ink, and I'm die cutting that with a coordinating die. And I'm using the Wedding Day from the Happy 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 stamp set, and I'm stamping that in the same ink, the Chipped Sapphire, onto Fog Cardstock by Lawn Fawn. And I'm also heat embossing the oxide in with clear embossing powder, just to give it some more shine. The embossing powder I'm using is the clear embossing powder by Wow. And off to the side, my heat gun was already heating up so that it's nice and hot before I take it to the paper. And these are all the parts that I will be using. I cut down a panel of sticky note cardstock. The background was die cut with the snowy backdrop, and I'm using 3 hills and a slimline card base. And I die cut all of those pieces with the stitched, large stitched slimline rectangles with sliders, I believe they're called, from Lawn Fawn, just to have the nice stitching edge all around the borders. I just cut down the sticky note panel by hand because that won't be showing though, so it wouldn't matter if they're stitching on it. Now I'm just adding the bottom panel, the sticky note panel, with some tape runner and the starry panel with liquid glue. Just making sure it lines up nicely and pressing it down nice and firmly. Now I'm trying to figure out the placement of my hills so that I would be sure that the yellow is also showing. So I just made a little pencil mark to know where I need to glue it down. Adding liquid glue to the back and just pressing it down. And now I'm just adding the next hill right on top. I'm removing the backing paper of the foam tape. And I tried to line it up by hand, but I wasn't sure, so I just used my shiny new Misty to line it up. I did go ahead and adhere all of those images. Unfortunately, I wasn't recording when I did that. So I just used liquid glue to add the veil to one of the bears, the bows, and the flowers to the car, and also the little cans. I will be removing the cans later on to put them in a different spot, but for now, this is how it looks. I die cut 2 of the happy coordinating word dies out of white cardstock. And I also die cut the stamped sentiment. And I'm just layering those 3 on top of each other using liquid glue just to give it more of a die cut look. Or no, chipboard look so that it has lots of dimension. And I cut down my sentiment strip just using my paper trimmer. I placed the car where I approximately wanted it, but I wanted to make sure that I add the sentiment first so that I would know what spacing I have to work with for the rest of the images. Then I placed down the wedding day just with some foam tape behind. And then I just started filling up my scene with the little elements. I started with the trees, just placing everything down using liquid glue because the car is propped up on foam tape and I wanted this to be the standout element, so I added everything else with liquid glue just flat to the back. Then I'm adding some trees to the chapel. I thought I wanted the little one in front, but I decided that it would look nicer behind. So I peeled it back up carefully because it wasn't dry yet. I was lucky there. And I just added it behind. And I'm adding liquid glue to the entire back of the panel, or of the images, and placing it down. Just using an acrylic block while it's drying, because it is above the hill, so there is a little bit of a bump, but it worked out fine. Now I'm just figuring out the placement, which trees go where. I decided to just add the big tree up on the left for now. Again, using an acrylic block to weigh it down. Now working on the tiny clouds. I die cut 5 of them, but that was just way too cluttered and I wanted the background to really stand out. I just wanted a few little clouds there, so I decided on 3. And I waited until now to do this. I wanted the inside behind the bell of the church to be the same color as the background so that it's like a church tower, so it's see-through. But I needed to see where it would land on the card to know the colors. So I'm using Y000, Y00, YR000, YR00, and YR02. And now it's time to start embellishing my card. I'm using the Wink of Stella shimmer pen, the brush version. Just adding them to the clouds, the windows, the bell, the veil, all of the flowers and the cans. Then I'm also using my Jelly Roll pen, the 10, or the 1, no, it's Jelly Roll 10. And I'm adding some white gel pen highlights to my images. I'm using some Stardust stickles on the centers of the flowers and also on the bell of the chapel. And I'm also adding some to the top part of my clouds. And I'm just using the nozzle of the bottle to flatten it out because I didn't want the dimension, I just wanted some glitter there, just to pull it down a little bit. And then I realized I didn't like it. The car was kind of floating in the middle and there was too much gray around, and I needed something more, like I usually do. So I went with the little hearts from Winter Village and also from You Are Sublime. I added the cluster of hearts at the top, then the smaller heart from this, and the tiny heart from the Winter Village. And I carefully removed the car from the panel. Now I'm adding it down a little bit lower so that there isn't too much of a just plain gray gap between the sentiment and the car. And then I'm adding the hearts that are colored with the same colors as the door, which is RV69, RV66, and RV63. I'm also adding in the cans again, just a little bit higher than I had them before. I put foam squares on the back of my hearts and I'm adding those in as well. Just so that they're floating above the car. The happy couple is driving away after they get married from the chapel, which I think is super cute. And yeah, then I'm adding in the last little tree. Also adding in the white gel pen highlights on the tree because I added that later. Going in with more shimmer pen. And then I'm using the Nouveau Crystal Glaze on the hearts. And this time I only, from the 2 hearts, I only used it on the small one. I let that dry and then used it on the big one as well, just to have 2 separate hearts in the glaze and not just one bunched up heart. And that finishes off my card for today. There you can see the shine from the stickles and also from the liquid stardust, which I think is really, really pretty. And also the Nouveau Crystal Glaze that I also added on top of the stickles on the bell and also to the windows of the chapel. And I really do love the crystal glaze. It was a bit tricky to work with because it's so warm in my apartment, but I just put it in the fridge for a little bit and that worked. I really like how it turned out, and I'm so glad that I made those little changes because I just thought those hearts and those tiny little things just added a little bit more to the card. I really hope you enjoyed this one. I'm really happy with how the card turned out. And down below in the description box, I will have links to my other social media and also a full product list of everything I used. On screen, I will link to 2 more videos that may interest you. I hope wherever you are staying safe and healthy. Thank you so very much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Bye!